Why did you write this book?
So I actually have had multiple politicians come and ask me, and businesses and charities for that matter, how to access the media. And when I had one politician who was running for office, state office, he and his communications director sat me down, were asking a bunch of questions, and then we came and met for a second time, and I met his family, and he showed me literally the copious notes that he had taken, and it was 3 pages worth. And then he asked me to volunteer in his campaign, and I said, thank you, but no thanks. And because the light bulb moment went off when I saw those notes, I realized that I probably needed to disseminate the information on my own. And once I started writing, Jeremy, it just took off. I mean, I could not stop. I was taking notes on receipts, on napkins at restaurants. I mean, anything I could get my hands on, because the ideas just kept flooding in. And Dr. Gary Chapman, who wrote the New York Times bestsellers, The Five Love Languages, I asked him, I said, how did you know this was going to be a bestseller? And he said, no, but you know you're onto something good when it's all you think about and you cannot stop. So that's where I was at.
This is
Hmm.
not easy for people that are just getting started with it.
Right.
So
And
how do you approach that?
well, in this book, I tried to really um, make sure it was easy to understand, because a lot of times people want to access the media, but they'll send in the wrong press release. For instance, I just had a book signing, and this lady said, I just don't understand. I have this really good program that colleges are interested in and deals with higher education, and I've written this really great 3 page press release, and I just can't get any responses. And I bet she has an amazing program. And she said, does this talk about this in your book on why it's not working for me? And the 3 pages is obviously way too long. And I said, you probably have some great video there that you don't even know that you could shoot, or some photos that you could include, and probably even some testimonies of who's already been affected by this program that you're showing people. And she didn't even think about that. So people think it's all about connections, and connections help you in any avenue of life. However, there are absolutely other ways that you can access the media, and it doesn't have to just be connections. This other lady who I helped, she's a sensei, which is like a teacher or leader in karate, and she was holding her first karate tournament, and she was going to send out a press release and ask me to look it over, and it just talked about when, where, and how much it cost. And I said, well, what if I knew that she also taught a self-defense class? And I said, well, would you be willing to go on air and, teach some self-defense moves, and then say, hey, by the way, we also have this tournament coming up if you're interested. And I said, also, you might want to talk about how many people this is going to bring to the community, because with the karate community tournaments, they have to travel a lot. And so it was going to bring a significant amount into town. And so that the number side and the statistics side drew out the newspapers, and she had no connections there. And then having an interview that moved, so she could, show how her hands were weapons, and any normal citizen could really protect themselves. That enticed the TV stations. So there's definitely different ways and different avenues, and I wanted I knew there were good people out there who deserved to get their good stories out there, and so that was also a motivation to write this book.
Talk a little bit about the challenge of the social media environment that we are in now. I mean, it's a noisy media space and a fragmented one too.
It really is, and one of the things I talk about in the book is how um, the people will share headlines without even reading them, because they think they know the whole story. And so that's the other thing I mentioned in this book is you might want to suggest a headline, so that the journalist or producer who's telling your story really knows truly the heart of the story and what it's really about. They may not use it, but it'll be food for thought, right? So social media, it can be a disadvantage, right? But it can also be an advantage. For instance, journalists have to be online. So if you have something on social media that's trending and really becoming popular, I have a friend who's actually battling breast cancer, and she's doing a blog, and that blog has just blown up. And so I've contacted, I helped her out and contacted some of the social media outlets, and they're interested just because she has such a huge following. And then the other aspect of it is, journalists have to be online. So when you have a story, ask them to promote it. Say, hey, maybe on your Twitter page, can you say, I'm going to be talking with Jill Osborn about accessing the media. And then after the interview, say, hey, would you mind, if you put this on your website, on your news website, can you say, by the way, if you'd like more information, you can go to jillosborn.com, or then say, or can you promote the story on your website too, or your social media outlet. So it can be difficult, and it's frustrating with the fake news and, what the rants and the trolls that can be on there, but it can also definitely be advantageous as well. And I actually haven't announced it yet, but I'm going to be doing a Facebook event with another anchor here in town as well. And, we talked about the different avenues and outlets of what to use. And social media has been such a hit for me with my book because I can just provide a direct link on Amazon. It was the #1 new release on Amazon the day it came out, and in public relations and communication and media studies. And I really attribute that to social media. And which I had no clue that was going to happen, but who has time to run out and take time to, go to Barnes and Nobles? No one. Everyone has busy lives, and no one has time to do that these days. So you're absolutely right in your point, and that it can certainly be helpful.
So you mentioned the polarized political climate that we are in, and yet I think when I think of media relations, I always think about that it's about relationships, whether it's traditional media or social media. And so I think, isn't it true that if you get to know the people that you're working with, it's going to go better than if you just kind of get caught in the cacophony of noise?
Right. Absolutely. And that's one of the things I talk about in accessing the media as well, is that if you send in a press release, follow up with a phone call. If you can talk face to face, I mean, nothing beats face to face. And it's really frustrating because in this day and age of technology, people think, oh, well, if I just send in a press release via email, then they should respond. But the email inboxes are just getting inundated. I mean, minute after minute. And so if you don't get a response through email, it's not necessarily because your story is terrible, but because the journalist or producer or the host may just not have time. And so, yeah, I think nothing, no matter what technology we have, nothing will ever beat that face-to-face interaction. But it also allows some opportunities like the one we're having right now.
You mentioned the number of followers that your blogger friend has and how that then attracted some media attention. Is that why looking at the data, looking at the numbers is important in social media because it carries some social capital, some influence as well?
I think so. I absolutely think so. I mean, one of the first things that my publisher, when I was shopping around for different publishers, he asked me was, well, how many followers do you have on social media? And I had actually taken a break from social media because at one point my 6-year-old looked at me and said, Mom, you're always on your phone. And I thought, oh, I'm the worst mother. So I took a little bit of a hiatus. And so then, when I was shopping around for a publisher, I unfortunately was not able to check that box off. And I said, don't worry, I'll try and build my numbers back up. But right now I have absolutely zero. Goose egg.
Going forward, what are the challenges and opportunities in working with media?
Challenges and opportunities. Hmm. I don't know. I don't know what the challenges might be. I think one of the biggest challenges is that I think everyone thinks that they're a reporter these days, and I think that it's unfortunate because a lot of people read into that and believe that. And, a real journalist will cite two sources for their story. And, I think it's also been a challenge for the media to feel that they're a trustworthy source because a lot of people are doubting that these days. Um, I do think, though, that the media is still a great way to get your message out to the masses because people do pay attention to that. And statistically, the a lot of people think that other stations that they pay attention to or other newspapers um, or that they don't pay attention to, excuse me, other stations they do not pay attention to are biased, but the ones that a person does pay attention to, they believe is true. So, I think there's a lot of validity to getting your story into the news still, and I don't think that's going to go away.
Yeah, I think of the old soapbox. If I go out on the corner and start shouting, two people will hear me. But if I get on Twitter, a whole lot more potentially can hear the message.
It's crazy.
So I think reach as well as engagement are things
Absolutely.
to strive for.
Yeah, absolutely. And for instance, a portion of the proceeds of my book are going to go to Susan Stevens, who is starting this foundation called Teal Drops. Tealdrops.org is her website. And it's because she lost her daughter to the opioid epidemic, January 2018. Her daughter was sexually assaulted and she got on anxiety medicine and it wasn't working. And then she turned to drugs to numb the pain. So Susan's taking her daughter's name and turning it into something good. And she came to me a couple months ago after this had happened and said, I want to get this word out there. I want to spread the word. And talking to her friends wasn't enough. She needed to access the media. She needed to not only do social media, but multiply her sources and her what's the word I'm looking for, Jeremy? Her
Or network.
Yes, and the people that she could touch because she did not want other parents to live through what she had. And so she got on, I helped her, she got on the local television stations. She got some, local stuff in the newspapers. And now, because of that, she's reaching out to various politicians and not only on the local level, but the national level as well. So, I think there's some credibility to you when you do get into the media and your story.
Well, and I think that leads to another thing that is important to discuss, which is how do we get back to a point where there is more of a sense of ethics in our media and communication.
Yeah, I think that starts with inside the business. I mean, whoever is there and who is in the leadership role has to be really diligent in telling their reporters, you've got to cite two sources for each story, and you have to be very diligent about telling the truth. And I've had some good bosses and I've had some bad bosses. And, the good bosses were really, really, I mean, just drove it into my head. It was set in stone. You tell the truth, you make sure that you are getting out the right story. And some of them, said it out of fear because of slanderous lawsuits, and others were, it was because of a moral thing. There was ethics there, and they wanted to make sure they were doing the right thing. And it's hard too because so many, and I talk about that too, is so many people are on a deadline, and if you don't make that deadline, then you're hearing it throughout the news station because it affects everything, and it affects the rest of the show. It affects the rest of the newspaper. So if you don't make that deadline, I mean, it is like throwing water on the candles on a birthday cake. Like, it just affects everyone. And so with with the deadline approaching, it's hard because if you don't have your sources cited, then, it's like, well, what do we do now? Because we've got to hit this deadline, but we haven't. So it's a downward spiral.
Everyone seems to suggest, even in our town, Warren Buffett suggests that 5, 10 years from now, newspapers for sure, radio and television also are going to look quite different than they do today. Any thoughts on the future of the business since you've had so much experience with it?
Well, I would never challenge Warren Buffett's prediction of the future. But I want to believe that newspapers are always going to be around just because having that piece of paper in your hand is just a luxury to me in my mind. But I do know that, people probably didn't think that you were gonna be able to listen to, music on an iPod um, and, television. I don't know if that'll go away or not, but newspapers, I think I'm concerned. I'm concerned about them because technology is just really making its way into everyone's hand and back pockets.
Well, and it seems to me it takes us back to what you talked about earlier because if all we have is social media advocacy and not the more objective voices of journalists trying to find the truth, I'm not sure we have the same quality of information.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
Anything else that I didn't ask you about today that I should have?
Excellent question. So one other thing is that if you are trying to access the media, just remember who the story's about. So the example I give is it's really important to know the two different types of people who are interviewed, and that is a subject matter expert and the man on the street, which is called an MOS. And the example that I give is if there's a high school shooting, the subject matter expert might be the doctor who's updating us on the status of, the victims, or a sheriff who's updating us on the status of the shooter. And but the MOS is the mom who may be received a text message from her daughter and didn't know if her daughter was going to live, or the student um, who helped his friend survive. So the MOS is a really important part of the story because they are the ones who are affected. Just like the person who came to me with the 3-page, press release. I'm sure she had affected so many people, but it was a second thought. So just remember, the heart and the soul of the story is with those people that are affected.